Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi. Can you guys hear and see me okay?
Yes, we
Great.
can you hear and see us okay?
Yes, we're all good. We're
That
ready
is
to go.
not always the case with us. We can be heard.
Don't say that. I had an event. I don't find Crowdcast always very user-friendly for whatever reason. And I had an event and they just could not get me in the room. And I was like, oh, and I was, by the time they got me on, it was like 2 seconds to spare and I was like sweating.
Oh, I know, right? I feel like there's nothing scarier these days than just
it's odd.
being Zoom and struggling.
Yeah. And you're trying to act like it's not a big deal. And meanwhile, you just know people are out there going, okay, like I got better stuff to do.
Oh my gosh. Natalie, we had this big like webinar a few months ago, like I think something over 500 people signed up for it. And we had the worst sound problems in the beginning. It felt like this is our opening act where we struggle. And then Elizabeth is just Southern. And I grew up kind of the same mentality as hers, like just keep smiling and nodding. Yeah. And that's what she did. And so our chat was full of people saying like, I can hear you, but I can't hear you. And it was
I was smiling, sweating. Yeah, it was
yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for selecting my book.
Oh my gosh, we are so honored that you joined us.
No, I'm just thrilled. Like you write a book and you're like, without these efforts, these characters that I love so much, especially the three women, but all of them, but those three women, and you're just like, I just want people to get to know them and find them. And so it's so important when bookshops do stuff like this. Like, I used to have a little bookshop, so I know I do not take lightly when people select my book and share it with their customers, because I know how many arcs and how many books come through the door. People have no idea how many great books are being published every week. It's insane.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think we have like that little panic of something slipping through our fingers, where we're just not going to be able to get to it, or we don't know it, or and we've had some instances where we found like this outlier that nobody knows about. That is amazing. But which is good, and also gives me anxiety of like, well, what if there's more out there that we don't know about?
Yeah, and I mean, debuting in a pandemic with my first book, and then watching, like, I was very lucky I had the jet fuel of Jane Austen, but watching a lot of my fellow debut authors have these brilliant books that just got missed. And I mean, some of the best books I've ever read just got missed. So do you know The Lost Book of Adana Moreau by Michael Zapata? It won the Chicago Review's Best Fiction of 2020. The Lost Book of Adana Moreau.
Okay. I think I have heard of that one.
It's amazing. It's in paperback now. And another brilliant book by Pete Beatty, Beatty, called, oh no, I'm gonna forget the name. It's the name of the river in Ohio. It's got this.
I the
Cuyahoga.
Yes, I read it. He's from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I'm.
I love that book. It had this kind of crazy William Faulkner-esque kind of like, I love that. And so anyways, and then the other one is The All Night Sun by Diane Zenna. Did you come across that one from Penguin Random House?
I saw that one in a catalog.
Yeah, she was longlisted for the best new fiction from the big organization. I'm forgetting the name. This is horrible. But it's about grief. So it's a book that's very valuable for people thinking about grief. Yeah. So I just feel very lucky. And then to have the second book just getting published again is just such a thrill. Did not think that was going to happen. So
really? Oh
yeah. I wrote the first book, Jane Austen Society. I wrote it when my husband was diagnosed with this sadly terminal illness, and he's stable on experimental drugs, but it's pretty stressful. And I wrote it for myself and for him, which is why the book was dedicated to him. And I remember telling everyone, like, I don't think I have another one in me. And then I think we were stuck at home in the pandemic, and the Jane Austen Society released and did so well. And I felt like I had an audience. And that was the unique motivation that this narcissist needed to get. I needed to know there were people out there going, give me more. And apparently that works really well with me. So I pitched my editor 2 weeks after the Jane Austen Society came out, and we sold, and it was like,
oh my gosh. I can't wait. We have so many questions about that because it
Great.
was, I feel like, such a good pandemic book.
Yes, yeah, it distracted me and kept me very happy. But I'm yakking.
Okay,
Sorry,
well,
ladies.
I mean,
I'm
this
yakking.
is what we love. We love a good author that
We
loves
haven't
to
gone
talk.
live yet, have we?
I think they're like trickling in. these
Okay.
participants. So no, but that's great. We can officially start, but I actually haven't introduced myself to you. I'm Allison Frenzel, and I'm one of the co-owners at Fabled, which we've emailed before. And Elizabeth, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Elizabeth Barnhill, and I am the adult book buyer at Fabled. So it's so good to finally see you. And again, we've been promoting your books since 2020. So it's fun to finally get to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so
Well,
much.
if it's okay, Elizabeth's going to introduce you officially with your bio. And I love the chat is one of my favorite parts because everyone in the beginning always says where they're from. And I feel like we are a bookstore with many neighbors from afar. So if you're on right now and you want to put in the chat where you're from, we would love to see it. Even our locals too, from Waco. And Natalie, where are you located?
I'm up in Canada. I'm near Toronto. I'm about an hour and a half from the border from Buffalo. So on one of the Great Lakes.
Oh, I even hearing that, it is so hot right now in Texas. I mean, we're getting August weather.
No, it's like 100 degrees here today as well. Yeah, we're in a nice.
I don't know why that makes me feel better.
yeah. No, we actually we get extreme hot weather for about 1 to 2 months, and that's it. So we felt like spring until like a week ago. But we're not complaining now.
Yes, I bet.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce Natalie, and we're again so excited to have you with us today. So Natalie Jenner is the author of the instant international bestseller, The Jane Austen Society and Bloomsbury Girls, a Goodreads Choice Award runner-up for historical fiction and finalist for Best Debut Novel. The Jane Austen Society was a USA Today and #1 national bestseller and has been sold for translation in 20 countries. Born in England and raised in Canada, Natalie has been a corporate lawyer, career coach, and most recently, an independent bookstore owner in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. So we are so happy to have you with us tonight, Natalie.
Oh, thank you both so much for having me here. I'm being excited, looking forward to this all day. My daughter broke her foot on the weekend and we spent the whole day at the hospital. No, she's fine. No, it's totally like it's a normal break. Everything's fine. But I was just like, I couldn't wait for this event. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. I hope this is a good, after all that, the stress, this is much more of a fun event.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, of course, we, like you were saying, when we saw your first book, we were attracted to it because of Jane Austen. I mean, that is just like catnip for us. And then this one came along and I was excited to see it was about a bookshop because of course, that's the world that we live in. I would love to hear if there was a bookshop that inspired the book for you.
That's a great starting question. Actually, there kind of is. I mean, it's definitely an amalgam of a handful of my favorite stores, and some of which I will mention the acknowledgements at the back. But it was really, I think the first real spark for this book came from rewatching a movie called 84 Charing Cross Road from the 1980s with Anthony Hopkins and Anne Bancroft. And that was set in Marx and Brothers bookshop, which was a real bookshop. And you could see real photos of it on the cover of the book. So that was, I think, visually that movie, that bookshop, which was recreated, obviously. But in terms of real life, there is actually on Lamb's Conduit Street in Bloomsbury, and that's why I've picked it for my book. There was a real bookshop called Persephone Books, and it's now moved to Bath. But for many years, it was on Lamb's Conduit, right in the middle of this hub of activity that I write about in my story. And it is a women's publishing house that is dedicated to finding and reviving and reprinting lost commercial books by women from the 20th century. And my daughter and I tripped across it and went inside and fell in love. And all the books have this beautiful robin's egg blue kind of grayish covering to them and beautiful end papers. And I love the idea that they had this printing press. And if you finish the book, you'll know that this becomes a real theme with one of the characters.
Oh, I love that. So this book has been called a companion novel to the Jane Austen Society. So it's not necessary to read it before you read Bloomsbury Girls, but it certainly enhances the experience. Can you tell us why, of all of the characters in the book, you chose Evie to bring her into Bloomsbury Girls from the first novel?
You know,
I
it's
want to
really,
say really quickly that we can definitely do spoilers because everyone has read the book in this chat.
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. I usually have to keep such a tight lid on it because I do love
okay,
having,
it's hard.
I love having twists. And I've just finished my third book last week, and I was in the car taking my daughter home from the hospital. And I was talking about, she's a writer too, and I was talking about twists and how, as a writer, there's nothing more fun than knowing that you're going to lobby a big twist at the reader at the end, and you write towards that. So I really love when people know what's happened, because for me as a writer, the big fun is revealing that. And with Evie, or with Evie, I call her Evie, sorry.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, no, it's with Evie, it was very simple actually. I had not intended to write again, and I had not intended to write a book connected with the Jane Austen Society. But when I was watching this movie, 84 Charing Cross Road, and I was thinking about a bookshop, and I was thinking about, I came up with the idea the exact month that I was promoting heavily the Jane Austen Society, May 2020. And I'm home, and the pandemic is in its first wave, and I'm kind of not going out much, and I'm certainly not able to go into bookstores much. And I remember thinking, I want to be set in the bookstore, and I am talking about these 8 characters from the Jane Austen Society so much, and I miss them because they become like friends, and I miss them so much. The more I talked about them, the more I missed them. And I was really thinking about what would make the most sense of the characters who had the least settled happy ending, because I'm a big fan of the happy ending. So I try to give a lot of that at the end of the books. And it made sense she was the youngest, and that she had the biggest future ahead of her. And also she is the only character of the 8 that has a connection to anyone from real life, which is, she is the age in the Jane Austen Society. She leaves school at 14, which was the age my mother had to leave school. Wow. And she is 16 at the end of the Jane Austen Society, which is the age my daughter was when I wrote the Jane Austen Society in 2018. And my daughter is now 20, which is the age of Evie in Bloomsbury Girls. And my daughter also studies English literature at university, is graduating. Well, not going to be processing very much tomorrow at convocation, but she's graduating, but she does research for some academics in the field of 18th century literature. Okay. And I actually did not know, the summer of the pandemic, she was doing this work virtually, and we weren't really talking like granular level about what she was doing. And I did not know she was doing research that far back. And I actually came up with the storyline. I was telling her about it, and she goes, you know, that's my job. I was like, no, I didn't know that. So I felt like fate. It felt like it was meant to be.
I love that. So she's graduating tomorrow?
Yeah. So, and then she's going to do her master's in creative writing, and she's already getting published, and small pieces in journals. And that's why Bloomsbury Girls is dedicated, to my daughter, the original Evie.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is so great.
Yeah.
Well, we looking at your book, and of course you have a good visual for us right there behind you. It has kind of that feel of that World War II feel of books, which again is, we actually did a whole display on, now your girls aren't facing the back, but all the books of the covers where the girl is facing the back, and it's always by World War II, and you see a plane, maybe an Eiffel Tower. It's always, exactly what you're getting when you read those books. And we did a whole display of just that like trope, and it said we called it like, we've got your back. But what about this particular, because this is set after World War II rather than during, is that a certain time, that time period interests you in this particular story?
I'm an interesting historical fiction writer, because what I really am is I'm very character and plot driven. And once I know when the stories are going to take place and what's at stake, the historic setting is maybe secondary for me as a writer. I'm really following these characters. They come alive very fast, and I really just feel like I know them, and I want to follow them, and I'll go wherever they take me. If they could take me forward 40 years, I'll follow them. But I I thought it made sense. I mean, I honestly, I don't plot or outline when I write, I just start typing. So I had moved my daughter home from residence. She was in a turret, like in an ivy covered building. We get her home, I sit down, I'm like, oh, I think I'll start writing a new book. And sure enough, I set it in campus at an ivy covered building, you know, in Cambridge. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking, when would this be? And I'm like, oh, she's graduating. So it's 1950. So that's when I stop. Then I sell the book on synopsis with that one first prologue. That's all I've written when I sell the book. Then when I start to write the book, I thought, how fascinating that this is the midpoint of the 20th century. And then I do a lot of research, and I'm doing a lot of heavy reading about England in particular at that time. And I become very interested in that time in history when something traumatic and horrible is behind everybody. Mm-hmm. And they're just so happy to be alive. And I think we can all, sadly, with the pandemic, can all like relate to that emotional arc. And they're just so happy to be alive. And maybe they're really leaving the past behind, but we know what's ahead. And where they're in is the sort of stable area, but there's tiny cracks, tiny little bubblings under the surface. And as a writer, I don't know, I think I'm a subtle writer. I'm not going to say that I am. I just feel that way when I write. But other people may not agree with that. But when I write, I feel like I'm always holding back a little bit because I want the reader to do a bit of work. And for me, I thought it was very interesting was to pick a time period where everyone kind of thought they knew, oh, this is the world now. And there's this whole second wave of feminism that's around the corner. And there's like all these things that are about to happen. They're going to change British society forever. And I also feel that that time in history, because it's stable, does allow for you to play with a bit more humor and wit and levity and irony, which are things I really love from Jane Austen, and which are easier to do in a stable time of history and much harder to do when the world is in turmoil. So I think that was the attraction.
Love it.
So Natalie, I don't know if I ever told you, but I read the Jane Austen Society in April of 2020. And it's one of the books, I mean, it was before it came out, and it was one of I will never forget the feeling I had when I read it, because I still remember the sense of calm and peace and hope and redemption in a time of utter turmoil. So I think, in this world, it's the pandemic's better, but we're still in a world of turmoil. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of these kind of hope and calm, redemptive stories in a world that is in such turmoil?
Oh, that's such a beautifully worded question, Elizabeth. Thank you. I had found, sorry, I get a little emotional when I talk about this part. So I had opened a bookshop 5.5 years ago, and 4 months after opening it, my husband gets diagnosed with a genetic and terminal form of lung disease, and he is currently stable on an experimental regimen of drugs. But we were given at the time 2 to 3 years of life, and our daughter was 14. So I had to close down the bookstore, and it was so traumatic. And we did these. It's our wedding anniversary today, by the way. He's like, you booked an event on our wedding. I was like, it's fine. We see each other we see each other all the time, and we celebrate all the time. It's wonderful. But we took some wonderful trips. We renewed our vows in Italy on a little Tuscan hill, and we did some amazing things. But I was really in a real state of what I now realize was anticipatory grief, which is a form of grief that I was not aware of, which is the loss of the future you thought you were going to have. And that is, I think, a variant of what we've all experienced with the pandemic. And the only thing that gave me distraction, comfort, solace, entertainment, and that sense of calm, Elizabeth, that you were mentioning, was the works of Jane Austen. So I was very intellectually intrigued as to why Jane could help me, as well as reruns of Cheers and Frasier and Downton Abbey. These are the things that were giving me joy. Oh, someone has their anniversary today, Lauren. Her big number 19. My husband says that our marriage is now old enough in Canada to drink. So,
nice.
But I was intellectually, as a former lawyer, I was really intrigued as to why her writing. And so I actually really studied it. I read a lot about it. And she makes a lot of choices with her writing that I think really help calm you when you're a reader. One of them is what is known as safe suspense. That is something that I actually tried to really achieve with both my books, which is you know there ain't going to be a head in the freezer or something. Like, it's going to work out okay. But the fun is that you don't know how. And when you bring a character to your heart, you want them at the end of the book. Maybe they don't get everything in the kitchen sink of happiness, but you want them to have reached a new place that's maybe even just a little better, or better understanding of themselves. That sense that they're going to be okay. And that sense finally that they're going to be okay, but life will continue to have things thrown at them, but they now are better able to cope. And so what I think literature can do in terms of that calm is, if you are engaging with the text and doing work to go on the journey with those characters, then I think you do feel a little bit of catharsis and a little bit of better understanding yourself at the end. And I think all of that contributes to helping you have hope and to helping you feel the safe suspense, I think contributes to calm. And I think that literature is one of the few, I think it's the only art form, if I think about it seriously, where you actually are in someone else's head. It's not that way when you watch ballet or a sitcom or look at a painting or a sculpture, and you're actually in their brain listening to the way their mind thinks and works. And I think that there's something, again, cathartic and therapeutic about that. But I think that it also helps you to feel emotion and intimacy with other people as a reader, that also helps you feel connected. And if you're lonely or sad at that time and you read a book and you feel connected to those people, then I think it gives you hope that you will connect again with others. And those are some of the reasons that I think that works can do that.
I love that. Well, talk about, speaking of pandemic, and I know that I remember Elizabeth pressing this into my hand when we were going through all of that. What's it like being a debut author during a time of the whole world shutting down, and you have this wonderful book that you're supposed to promote?
I mean, I was very lucky, I think, because of the Jane Austen connection. I think that, first of all, the publishing gods shined on me from the time I got an agent through the release of the Jane Austen Society. So I felt very blessed that my book was being like recognized or isolated in some way that people were going to find it. So I remember being very happy actually at that time, despite everything going on around me. And I also remember feeling that the whole reason I was attracted to Jane Austen with the first book was also her life, like not just her writing, but also her life and this resilience. And maybe not everyone knows this, but they think she was probably sick, chronically ill with maybe Addison's disease, but something maybe as far back as writing Emma, and during the writing of Persuasion, and during the months that she started Sanditon, and she kept writing. And so for me, when the pandemic happened, and we'd already pivoted with my husband's health to a sort of new way of living life, and then when the pandemic happened, and I remember thinking that everything was happening to me because of Jane Austen, and I felt this need to honor her. And I kind of just felt really lucky and blessed. And to this day, I look back at that time as bizarrely one of the best times of my life, because of the sheer amount of reader response and bookshop support and just the messages. I mean, I was probably one of the luckiest people in the world, because I had people messaging me all day long about my words helping them. And I will, sorry, I'll get emotional. I will go to my grave remembering that.
I love that. So great.
So it was actually a very timely time to have a debut novel because of what you meant to the world, the reading world. Okay, pivot. We want to talk a little bit about the 51 rules in the bookstore. So I want to know how you came up with these rules. I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that you worked in human resources. So are workplace rules near and dear to your heart?
I am not very good at administering the HR handbook. But what happened with the rules was I never intentionally thought I was going to have them be a very active part of the book. The characters, just at the very beginning of the book, as I'm writing it, because I write sentence by sentence. So the order in which you read the book is the order in which I write it. I don't it's very lean, and I add on to it, but I don't change anything. And I just remember the characters, like, they're so unhappy. And they're like, oh, remember, you can't do that rule, whatever. But there was something about Mr. Dutton's office in the movie 84 Charing Cross Road, the manager of the bookshop has this office at the back with glass walls around it. You can see everything that's going on. And you would know, owning a bookshop, that back room, you don't want anyone to see what's in there, right? Like,
Yes.
like towers of arcs and books and everything. And I thought, what kind of man would want to be able to see everything going on? And then I started to really aggressively, as I was writing, have more rules. I went, oh, this guy is really trying to control his environment. He really wants to kind of know what's going on and why. I didn't know yet. Spoiler alert, I didn't know about his sexuality when I was starting to write the book. So I didn't know why he needed to feel so much control of his environment. So my editor reads the book and he loves the rules, and they're sprinkled through the text. And he says to me, wouldn't it be fun if you started each chapter with one of the rules? So then this is what's really interesting for me as a writer. Said I did not realize that a lot of the time, the rule that's being mentioned in the chapter is actually being subverted by the characters, and that there was humor in there. So then where I didn't have a rule in a chapter, because I only have like 43 chapters, but there was 51 rules. I made up 51, by the way, because he struck me as the kind of man that would get to 50 and want to keep going. And he would do 51. And then like Frank Allen or someone would be like, that's it. Like, you're stop, no more. So what I did was I would read a chapter. There's not many, but maybe 5 to 10 chapters where there hadn't been an articulated rule. And I would think about what was going on. And then I would try and come up with a rule that would reflect what was being subverted, the behavior that was being subverted. And then I actually did create an Excel spreadsheet. And then I actually did make sure that the rules were in order of when they would appear in a handbook. And then I had to like mess around with the chapter headings, and it was fun. And I still have that document. I was just making a file today, the box, we put everything, all the drafts, and I found like my little printout of the rules. So yeah.
That is so fun. That would be such a good like merch item to buy with this, is the book of rules.
The book of rules.
That is so fun. Well, one thing that I love about both your books is how well you do unlikely friendships between people. And it really feels, especially this one, feels like a work environment of people who are thrust together and they need to work together. Does your HR background come into that, or is there something that inspires you, or how did you do it so well?
Yeah, it is a variant of HR. So I have been an HR manager or assistant director of HR, but for other years, decades, I've run my own business as a career coach. And that is working a lot of the time with lawyers and accountants in large organizations who've been let go. So it's a outplacement, is what we call it. And one of the things that comes out of outplacement is watching people at the hardest time in their life have to start asking people for help. They've lost their job, and they maybe have had that job for a while, and they maybe haven't fed their network and kept their network going. They maybe don't have a lot of people to turn to for help. And I get to work with people in their 20s, and one of the things I was very big on was I would say, your network, it's like an RSP, which in Canada is an investment vehicle. There you put money in when you're young and it grows, and then when you pull it out, you don't get taxed. And I said to them, like, start when you're young. Start being curious and kind to others, taking interest in others, help them when you can. And it may not come back at you, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because that makes you a good human being and a good citizen of the world. And that is a better way to live your life. And so my view is you don't do things just transactionally. You do it because it just makes life more fun for all of us, right? If we are kind and curious and help each other. And that idea of connecting with others and taking chances and staying open to people and staying open, like, when my daughter and I are at the hospital and someone in line says something and you chat with them and you just stay that open and porous, to new experiences. And I think that was something. I love friends. I have wonderful friends. I think friendship is one of the great joys of life. And I love, in my books, you'll see there's not a lot of family, because what I'm really interested in is who we choose to love and who we choose to share with. And so those are why my books tend to focus on friendship. And also, I think that idea of networking and connecting with others. E.M. Forster, has this epigraph in Howard Zen, which is one of my favorite books, which is only connect. And I've lived that, my whole life. And so I do think that is where that concept is coming through in my stories.
So great.
Well, speaking of the friendships, think about all three women. So Evie, I've been saying Evie, I'm thinking Evelyn, but it's Evie.
Yeah.
Yes, Vivien and Grace. It's unusual because I really loved all three of them. There wasn't one that I was like, oh, it's her turn again. So tell us a little bit about writing those three women, and is there one that you more identify with personally?
It's interesting because, like I said, Evie is definitely the one that's most connected to real life with my mother and my daughter, and probably the conduit between the two. And that I too, I'm like a dog with a bone when I get interested in something, and that's Evie, right? Like that, I don't let it go. Look at me with Jane Austen. I was like, I'm going to reread Jane Austen. I'm going to read everything about her, and then I'm going to read a book about her. Like, I was not dropping that bone. And that's what Evie's like. And when I was writing the book, Vivien and Grace appear at the exact same time on page 1 of chapter 1. They just show up, and I can picture what they're wearing, and I can picture each other. And I, as I wrote, really came to admire Grace's stoicism and her fortitude and her patience and these wonderful, honorable qualities. Can you guys hear me okay? It says that, yeah, okay, I got a message, but
Yeah, little squiggle a bit better. Yeah.
Okay. And I really fell in love with Grace. I also fell in love with Lord Baskin and Grace. So I did not know that was going to happen. I don't know, I think I thought maybe Lord Baskin and Vivien. I even actually write about that at some point in the stories, that I think somebody thought that was who he was probably interested in. And then with Vivien, I just remember that the more sassy she got and the more outspoken she became and the more ambitious she was, and then the evolution of her kind of leaving behind her past a bit, and moving forward with these new relationships with these mentors, and her openness to the friendships with Ellen and Daphne du Maurier. I think I really started to identify with Vivien as somebody who's coming out of grief and hasn't really shaken it very well. Like, she hasn't really left it behind very well. And these people are kind of pulling her forward. And so in the end, I think I probably identified the most with the arc that Vivien goes through, and a little bit of her ambition, I think, and a little bit of her sassiness.
That is so. Vivien was my favorite. I feel like she looked like Joan on Mad Men in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, tall, beautiful, but she was like Peggy in Mad Men, where
Yeah.
she was gonna be scrappy, do everything to get to the top.
She's actually the main character in the third book that I just finished. It's going to come out sometime in 2024, and it's going to follow her to 1955. She's had a couple of plays bomb, and she's going to be through Peggy Guggenheim. She's going to learn about a job at Cinecittà, the movie studios in Rome, where a group of American expatriates are making some movies, and she's going to become a script doctor for a little while. And she is going to basically a new group of people, but there will be some cameos. And it was a lot of fun to kind of go deeper with her. And yeah.
Oh my, I can't wait. 2024 is too far away though. I was
Anytime.
Hey, so being an indie bookstore owner and you experiencing that as well, I'd love to discuss kind of the operations of what you, I guess when you're imagining it. Elizabeth and I were talking about how it seems like the bookstore had a lot of staff. And I was like, if only we had people for each genre, that would be so amazing. Because a lot of times we're like, I'm on a ladder and then also writing the rent check or something.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
you just kind
of.
It
was a one-woman shop, so I know what you mean.
Yes. I mean, you're doing everything. With kind of building that operations wise, did you draw in from your own experience, or did you envision another bookstore?
No, it's right here. It's called The Romance of a Bookshop, 1904 to 1929, and is the first 25 years of Foyle's bookshop in London.
Really? Okay.
And what happened was in 1929, that's how I found out they did literary luncheons at the hotel at the Dorchester. So I had bought this years ago at a used bookstore. And when I knew I was going to write about a bookshop, I do this really odd, compulsive Evie type thing, which is I wonder if what I have lying around the house that I've never read, or a movie, DVD, or that I haven't watched that deals with this. And it's almost like it's waiting for me. And this was one of the things I bought. So I right away read it. And you guys are going to love this, but so it is written by the staff as a 25-year memoriam, kind of. So it had information on prices and costs and profit margins and like where they got the books from and what they did when the books didn't sell. And it had pictures of all like the different
That is so fascinating.
staff and owners, but you're gonna love this. It talked about some of the employees, like there's a lot of them, right? Like a lot, all men.
That's where I was like, well, how are they having full-time jobs?
Yeah, and it was like, honestly, like 2 floors, 3 floors, Charing Cross Road, 1920s, million books, like crazy big, right? Like the way we think of like a Barnes and Noble today. And they had on the staff these really discreet departments. So they actually had, and I cheated. This is where I cheated. So there was an entomologist heading the science department, which is going to become Ash. And there was a master mariner seaman heading the history and kind of more maps. And I remember thinking about this and doing the exact same thing that you just said, which is that is a lot of staff. And like what they're doing can't be that expansive, right? Because there's so many of them. So somebody said recently that each person in my book that heads a department, their personality is like the books that are in their department. And I hadn't made that intentionally, but this book was really the real kind of starting point for me to think about having a lot of different people. And then the last thing to say about that is I wanted this book to explore these 3 women's search for agency in their lives. It was really important to me, but I'm a humanist. So I also wanted the men not to be villains in the store, but also perhaps to be there as a second choice, that there was something else they wanted to be doing with their life.
Right.
Well, I loved the famous literary characters who found their way into Bloomsbury Girls, including Daphne du Maurier, Ellen Doubleday, Peggy Guggenheim, and what kind of research did you do for the real people in the story, and did anything surprise you?
Yeah, I when I sold on the prologue, I then spent a couple months of just reading like everything that I could find online, because I wasn't really leaving the house for research. And I bought a lot of books. So I found, ironically, I was sent accidentally by a rare bookstore, this other book, which is Daphne du Maurier's own memoir that she wrote about herself called Myself When Young.
Wow.
And it's the making of a writer. And I had bought an edition of Mansfield Park with an introduction by Daphne du Maurier, and the rare bookstore in England. This is March of 2020, so it's chaotic.
Right.
Has made the wrong book. So I have this book, and so I actually start to read this book, and it really made me feel close to Daphne du Maurier, and it really made me committed to having her show up in the book. And if you research Daphne du Maurier at all, you will immediately find out about her great love for Ellen Doubleday. And so I, put Ellen in the book as well. And in my synopsis, I mentioned 5 names. I don't mention Sonia Blair. I don't know yet that she's going to show up, but I mention Peggy Guggenheim, Samuel Beckett, Daphne du Maurier, and then Ellen and Nelson Doubleday. And it's taking place in 1950. And so this is the funny part, is that James Sargent used to be the chair of Macmillan, which is the parent company of my publisher, St. Martin's Press. And he actually is the grandson of Ellen Doubleday. I don't know this. Wow. My editor knows this. My editor knows him. My editor reads my pitch, and my editor knows and tells my agent, Nelson Doubleday died in 1949. And I've said he's going to be in my book. And my agent's like, she does her research like all over the place like this. Right. Don't worry, she'll figure that out. But what was ironic was that theme of widowhood was something I really then leaned into as I wrote. I became very interested in what kind of people would have the ability to mentor these women and care about them getting to a better place in their own lives. And that's also how Sonia Orwell, George Orwell's widow, is going to show up. I don't know she's going to show up, but I had done a bit of research. Her name had come up And then I had someone stand up and mention the doll to Daphne du Maurier in the literary luncheon. And I just right away went, oh, this would be so great to make it Sonia Orwell. So the last thing about what surprised me was that I did not know about the mummy. Like, I didn't know that this book existed. So that was a big surprise in my research. With characters, I didn't know that Daphne du Maurier had written as far back as when she was a teenager, but that she had tried to get published, and some of these stories were kind of pulled together and almost published in the 30s, but then they weren't. Then they went missing. And the doll is a real story that went missing for 70 years and then was found by a female bookseller in Cornwall in 2010. And I don't even remember where she found it. And I remember reading what it was about. And I was just like, I was more shocked than surprised. I was like, wow. So that was, I think, the biggest surprise for me. Yeah.
Well, when we of course got this book, and we're so excited, and it was called Bloomsbury Girls, and it was about a bookshop. And in our bookshop, books about books sell so well. And so I mean, it's easy to sell something that you know is going to sell regardless of what the story is, but it was so great that this was a wonderful story. Have you had that experience with other people, like messaging you, like the love of books, the idea that people love to read about bookshops? I mean, it's kind of its own like trope.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, and it was funny because I wasn't maybe fully aware of that, because I'm a really erratic reader, in the sense that I pick up books for very odd reasons and read books like just kind of all over the place. And I wasn't really processing just how much people love to read about bookshops. And when I watched 84 Charing Cross Road, the movie, I remember watching all these characters in the background going, there's a whole other story in here. And I miss bookstores because I can't go in them right now. And my book is coming out and I can't go see it on the shelf, which is one of those weird writer dreams or goals. And, but the other thing too, was that I just was really missing bookshops. So when I write, I'm usually writing to be somewhere that I miss, or to be somewhere that I wish I could be. And with the Jane Austen Society, I just missed Chawton so much. I wanted to go back, and writing that book was a way for me to go back to Chawton, and also to talk to people about Jane Austen. I created these characters so that I could kind of have my own little society, and like, you know, I would work through my characters, their views on these books. And with this book, I wasn't really thinking so much about how popular bookshop books were. But ironically, I'm sure that that is why my publisher and a lot of people really got excited about this book. And then what's wonderful is now I get these responses from people, and they're like, I love books about bookshops so much. And they're so grateful to me for adding to that group, right? And so many wonderful, the Mayfair Bookshop and the Paris Bookseller, and like there's so many wonderful books coming out all the time about bookshops. And I just feel really grateful that readers want to, that's a place they want to read about, you know, that they love books so much.
Yeah, we do an annual display on books about books, usually on Fabled's birthday. So we're like, it sells so well, it makes us happy to see it. So we're going to keep doing it. Okay, this may be an unfair question, but do you have a favorite scene or storyline in the novel? I'm sure you love them all, but what was really fun for you to write or to explore in the book?
Well, I guess two. I definitely remember not knowing that Alec and Vivien had a past when I was writing. And I remember the minute Alec turns over the watch, I'm literally going, like, as I'm writing, I'm like, oh, what's on the back of the watch? And then I'm like, why does he know there's something on the back of the watch? And I'm like, oh, right. And then I literally wrote the word at the beginning was a mistake. Like I was like that, and I left it. And then I sat back for about a day and I went, okay, wait a minute. They've got a history. They're not about to sleep together for the first time. They've had a history. And I was really enjoying that storyline because I had no idea what those two were up to. I had no idea if they liked each other. I had no idea they had this past. So for me as a writer, that was really fun. But for me as a reader, I think the storyline that I most loved was the last 70 pages, which starts with Evie. I love that I can talk about this because I can never talk about this. I love the whole moment where Septimus Phoebe shows up banging on the window, like, let me in. And Evie, as is her wont, does not understand how like much trouble she's going to get into. And I love everything that happens those last 70 pages. And I love the moment where they're all like, can't we give her something? Because my husband and I would talk about this. We'd be walking the dog and he's like, I go, she can't steal it. She's not that person. She's got to get this book in an honorable way, right? And so that was something I had to figure out. So I remember Grace going, give her something, nothing valuable, like it could maybe, you know, from the history floor or whatever. And he's like, well, what do you want, my dear? And she just goes, the mummy. And I just, every time I hear her say that, I get this feeling in the back of my neck. So I know that they're going to take over the bookstore in the end, but I don't know how they're going to do it. And I'll never forget, I was washing dishes. It was the summer of 2020, and I was thinking about it, and I had this image, and it was an image of Daphne du Maurier jumping in a cab and going Cornwall pronto. And I'm like, what is that? What is that? And I right away thought of a caper. And like, I started to channel some of my favorite caper movies, like the Thomas Crown Affair. You know what? I'm starting to think my battery, one second, am I charging? Okay, I'm going to lose power. Okay, sorry.
Oh, no.
Give me 1 sec. Sorry about this. I don't know what happened.
No worries. I honestly feel better because we always have some sort of emergency.
Oh, okay, the cord came out. Sorry. Okay. Okay, I think that'll do it. That was so embarrassing. Okay, I'm back.
We had one time an author who, if his computer shut down, then he picked up his phone and was on his phone. It was a real like dicey.
Oh, I've done that. Yeah, so I was really channeling like Ocean's 11 and Thomas Crown Affair, and I was just like, and that was honestly the most fun I've ever had, was writing the whole ending. Now, the last chapter of the book I didn't write at the beginning in the first draft or the second draft, or even the third. So then we submit my third draft to I usually do about 2 or 3 drafts with my agent over a period of about 6 to 8 months. And then we submit it to my editor, and then he and I will work on it for another 4 months or so. And I remember my editors, like, you know, he loved it, everything's great. They didn't make me change or take out anything, but he said, you know what, I want more at the end. I want to know, like, and so I sat down and I remember writing that last chapter, and it was just like writing the epilogue of the Jane Austen Society. I wrote it in one go. And I wrote an article for LitHub recently called The Unhappy Happy Ending. And it was about, like, I have this penchant for happy endings, but why? And then do they have to be happy? And I remember with both this book and the Jane Austen Society, I wanted everybody to get everything they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
If I liked them, I wanted them to get it all. And I can't help myself. And I think Jane Austen was the same way. Yeah. I think Jane Austen loved her characters. I think that's it. In the end, people ask, like, why? It's like, because you love your characters so much. If you love your characters so much, then you want them to get everything that they want, because the way you want your friends or family to. And so I remember as I was writing the final chapter, where you find out about the new bookstore and everything that's happened, and the rules, the new rules at the end, that was so much fun. Like, it just a high, the most fun you can have.
That's so great. And in life, not many people get everything they want, so it has to be satisfying to bestow all of that to them.
It is. It's cathartic, and it's a form of therapy, I think.
Well, I'd love to hear our last question. Would be if you have any favorite authors or what you're reading right now.
You know, it's funny because I can't read fiction when I'm writing. So I'm just finishing up my third book. I tend to read a lot of New Yorkers, like a lot of long form journalism, nonfiction. I reread. So I've been rereading a lot of Truman Capote, because he's one of my favorite writers. For some weird reason, I want to read him every May. I don't know what that's about. So I've been rereading a lot of Truman Capote. And my favorite authors, I would say, are people who are really interested in the social face that we have to put on and who we really are behind that. So this takes me back to Jane Austen through, maybe not George Eliot so much, but Henry James. So I really love Henry James through the postmoderns. So E.M. Forster, Edith Wharton, one of my favorite writers, Virginia Woolf, And that is like a time in history and a place where I really love that group of writers. There's a bunch of male American writers between the wars that I really love as well. So I love Steinbeck, Hemingway, Fitzgerald. I love Catherine Ann Porter. One of the things I loved about this book is getting to mention some of my favorite women authors, like Elizabeth Gaskell and Catherine Ann Porter, that people don't always know as much about. And I believe Catherine Ann Porter might have been from Texas, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to remember. So in modern times, I really love Susan Minot, Penelope Fitzgerald, Ian McEwan, Kazuo Ishiguro, Paul Auster, Elizabeth Strout, just like these really lyrical, brilliant, insightful, like their psychological insight is without par. That is something in a writer that I really twig to.
I love because I see elements of your book in these authors too.
That's really interesting, but I think I'm really porous, and that's why I can't read when I write. Because if I read a brand new, brilliant debut author while I'm writing my book, they'll get in there, and then I'll feel terrible.
Right. You're like, I didn't mean to copy you. You just got in there. Susan in the chat said
yes,
that Catherine Ann Porter,
she was from Indian Creek, Texas. Oh yeah, no, I love her. And by the way, if people are looking for a short story to read right now that will resonate with them, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, which deals with the Spanish flu and a time of war. And it's a really, from the consciousness of this female character, it's a really brilliant, it's one of the best short stories ever written. And I highly recommend from a Texan.
Yes, I love it.
I love when we end up this and we have like new books to either buy or because I know Elizabeth, our book buyer, was like taking notes when you were writing in the beginning.
What? Okay, got it. Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we do normally on these events, we introduce our next book club pick. So if you don't mind just waiting a second, our next book club will be The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich, and it is July 19th. It comes out actually, and I think in 2 weeks, but it is well worth your time. One of my favorite books of the year. It explores the idea of one day, everybody over the age of 22 across the entire world goes out their front door and finds a string. And the string tells you how much life you have left. So there are long stringers, there are short stringers. Different countries handle it in different ways. I was utterly fascinated. It was one of the most fascinating books, and I cannot wait to speak to the author. It's her debut book. I think she's 26 years old, so that's going to be different. But definitely pre-order it, Fabled. It'll be in 2 weeks. You are going to not be able to put it down, so you'll have it done by July 19th, and can't wait to talk to her then.
Yes, and I have put the Zoom link in the chat if you want to sign up for our next book club. Also a link to buy the book from us. We would of course love that. I can't wait to read this one. When Elizabeth told me about it, it was on my radar, among other things. And now I have more. Thanks to you, Natalie. Always never-ending list. Well, thank you again for joining us. I feel like I love this book even more hearing you talk about it, and just you have such a talent for nostalgia, and which we're all about at Fabled. And I hope someday you get to visit and feel that same thing.
I can't wait. I would love to come to Texas. And thank you all so much for reading my books and for all the support, and for everyone that's tuned in. It's why I write. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.